December 16, 1944. Mona, Germany. A frigid winter dawn blankets the landscape in silence and snow, but beneath this cold exterior, a storm is poised to erupt. The earth beneath the trees is hard, unyielding, a frozen witness to the chaos brewing just out of sight. This morning, nothing would remain the same. Suddenly, the quiet is shattered. A deafening roar rises into the sky as American artillery unleashes another volley, slicing through the winter air. The shells are expected to explode on impact, sending shrapnel and destruction into the German lines. But something bewildering happens. These shells do not explode on the ground or in the trees. Instead, they detonate mid-air, unleashing deadly steel fragments directly above the advancing Germans. The morning sky, once filled with a whisper of snow, becomes a canvas of chaos and steel. Soldiers, caught in trenches, in foxholes, behind trees, all are suddenly exposed to a lethal rain from above, with no escape. German soldiers, veterans from endless battles on the Eastern Front, face a terror that defies their experience. Their years of knowing how to seek cover, how to hide from artillery, seem futile. The shells burst at heights between 30 and 50 feet, covering a broad cone of destruction that annihilates everything beneath. This was no ordinary artillery. It was a secret weapon, a scientific marvel. Proximity-fused shells, packed with miniature radar systems, capable of sensing their proximity to targets and detonating at just the right height to maximize devastation. Axelson's decision to deploy these shells without approval was reckless, dangerous, yet undeniably effective. As the shells exploded overhead, the Germans encountered death in a form they had never known. The fragments shattered trees, tore through soldiers' uniforms, and wiped out entire units in moments. The old tactics of cover and concealment crumbled before this new, terrifying technology. The battlefield transformed in an instant. What was once a routine artillery attack became a science of destruction so precise, so lethal, that it would forever change the face of warfare. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, the war's traditional rules had been rewritten with each airburst, each fragment, each devastating explosion. This was just the beginning. The storm unleashed that day was more than just a military assault. It was the dawn of a new era. An era where science and war collided, where death was no longer just a matter of impact, but of precise scientific calculation. And in that icy silence, the future of battlefield technology had begun. As the icy dawn of December 16th faded into morning, the ramifications of Colonel Axelson's bold decision rippled across the frozen Ardennes. The secret artillery shells with proximity fuses, miniature marvels of engineering designed to explode above enemy troops, had delivered devastation unprecedented in modern warfare. But how did such a remarkable weapon come to be? And what did it mean for the men left to fight in its deadly shadow? At the heart of this technological breakthrough was a fusion of scientific ambition and wartime urgency. In laboratories far from the battlefield, minds pored over one of the 20th century's greatest challenges: how to increase the lethality of artillery without increasing the cost or weight. The answer emerged from the combination of radar technology and miniature electronics hidden in a small, rugged package that could survive the immense forces fired by a cannon. Inside each fuse resided about 130 components, including tiny vacuum tubes no larger than pencil erasers, each painstakingly designed to withstand the unimaginable acceleration of artillery fire, 20,000 times the force of gravity, and the blistering heat inside the barrel. Upon firing, the shell's battery was activated automatically, powering the embedded radar transmitter that continuously scanned for the ground or nearby targets. When the reflected radio waves reached a certain intensity, signaling the ideal distance from enemy troops, the fuse triggered an explosion mid-air. This precise timing created a deadly curtain of steel fragments, spreading outward like a storm of death, vastly more effective than traditional ground impact shells. The development of this technology was top secret, managed with the utmost care by scientists at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, under the watchful eye of Dr. Merle Tuve. Security was tighter than even the atomic bomb projects, and factories dedicated to fuse production converted entire product lines to mass-produce these critical war items around the clock. By late 1944, America's industrial might was churning out 40,000 such fuses daily. Yet, this technological marvel carried risks. For months, proximity fuses had strict limitations, their use confined primarily to anti-aircraft defense, aiming to bring down enemy planes. The fear was that if a shell were captured by the Germans intact, they could reverse engineer the technology, potentially turning the tables of the war. Guarding this secret had been a top priority for Allied command, but the desperate situation at Monschau changed everything. Colonel Axelson's unauthorized order revealed that these restrictions were untenable on a battlefield where American troops faced annihilation. The effectiveness of proximity fuses in ground combat was undeniable, and soon, restrictions were lifted. On December 21st, Supreme Headquarters authorized widespread deployment of the shells in artillery units fighting through the Ardennes. The proximity fuse wasn't just a new weapon, it was a game changer. Forward observers no longer needed to meticulously adjust each barrage or rely on spotters for precise targeting. The shell found its own lethal moment to explode, reducing the need for pinpoint accuracy and exponentially increasing the size of the kill zone. For the German soldiers caught in this unrelenting firestorm, the Ardennes forests, their previous sanctuary, became a deadly trap. The airbursts tore branches and sent splinters flying like arrows through the cold air. Foxholes, once life-saving shelters, now became death traps. The very trees that shielded soldiers became weapons against them. As American artillery unleashed these new shells, entire platoons dissolved under their withering rain of steel and wood fragments. The Battle of the Bulge was no longer just a test of endurance or tactics. It was a trial by science, where old soldiers' wisdom was rendered obsolete by physics and ingenuity. Across the front lines, soldiers whispered rumors of the funny fuses, a weapon that could see in the dark and strike with unerring accuracy from the sky. For many, the proximity fuse became synonymous with an invisible, unstoppable force, an eerie new kind of death that no training could prepare a soldier to face. This was only the beginning. As the Battle of the Bulge raged on, the proximity fuse would continue to rewrite the rules of engagement and prove decisive in shaping the outcome of one of World War II's most brutal and pivotal battles. The Battle of the Bulge was not only a brutal test of endurance and strategy, but also the proving ground for one of the most revolutionary technologies of World War II, the proximity fuse. Its impact on the battlefield was profound, transforming artillery from a mere support weapon into a decisive force of destruction. As the German offensive surged through the Ardennes in December 1944, American forces found themselves encircled and outnumbered, particularly in the besieged town of Bastogne. The 101st Airborne Division, surrounded and facing relentless assaults, relied heavily on artillery support. Among these defenders, the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion wielded 75mm pack howitzers, capable of firing the new proximity-fused shells. Between December 19th and 31st, the 463rd fired thousands of rounds. While not all carried the proximity fuses due to supply limits, those that did had an immediate and devastating effect. German assault formations, confident in their traditional tactics, were caught in open fields under snow. The proximity-fused shells detonated above them with precise timing, unleashing overlapping fields of steel fragments that left no safe places. Entire platoons were wiped out in moments, their formations melting as if dissolving into the cold air. Similarly, the all-African-American 969th Artillery Battalion played a crucial role around Bastogne. Their 155mm howitzers used proximity-fused shells to create what German prisoners would later describe as a ring of death around the town. The larger explosive radius of these shells, bursting at around 50 feet, cleared entire areas of enemy forces. German soldiers admitted to losing cohesion and fleeing prematurely, bewildered by this seemingly omnipresent threat. One of the starkest demonstrations of the fuse's lethality occurred at the Sauer River crossing on December 25th and 26th. General George S. Patton's Third Army was pushing northward to relieve Bastogne when they intercepted a German battalion attempting to cross the partially frozen river. Believing they were concealed by darkness and fog, the Germans advanced under traditional assumptions. However, proximity-fused artillery required no lengthy adjustments or spotter guidance. The shells exploded overhead with ruthless efficiency, turning the crossing into a slaughter. Patton himself recorded witnessing over 700 German fatalities in minutes, a level of destruction almost unimaginable by previous artillery standards. Proximity fuses worked by emitting radio waves at 180 to 220 megahertz. As a shell descended, its tiny radar transmitter reflected signals off the ground, trees, vehicles, and bodies. When the return signal reached a set level, indicating optimal burst altitude, usually 30 to 50 feet, the shell detonated. The engineering challenges were immense. Vacuum tubes had to survive both the extreme acceleration from the cannon and high temperatures while remaining sensitive enough to trigger perfectly timed explosions with over 80% reliability. By the end of December, the use of proximity fuses had become a key factor in blunting the German offensive and enabling American forces to mount counterattacks. The shells transformed artillery into an almost autonomous killer, reducing the need for perfect accuracy or intensive forward observation. In the words of General Patton, the proximity fuse won the Battle of the Bulge for us. Where raw numbers and traditional tactics might have faltered, this technological superiority redefined the battlefield and helped turn the tide in one of history's most desperate battles. The legacy of the fuse was not only in the destruction it caused, but in its demonstration that innovation and industrial might could decisively sway the fortunes of war. The frozen forests and hills of the Ardennes witnessed a transformation in warfare throughout the cold days of late December 1944. The Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's desperate gamble to turn the tide of war, was encountering a foe not just of soldier or tank, but of tiny, hidden technology that changed every calculation on the battlefield. Proximity fuses had shattered the old rules of engagement. The forests that once concealed German movements became a proliferation of lethal splinters and metal. When a proximity-fused shell detonated above the trees, it did more than spray shrapnel through the air. It shattered branches by the thousands. These wooden splinters, some as long as a man's arm, flew through the cold air at hundreds of feet per second, punching lethal holes through clothing, flesh, and bone. No longer could soldiers shelter beneath the canopy or rely on the camouflage of dense terrain. The effectiveness of airburst explosion in forest warfare multiplied the already catastrophic lethality of these shells. Soldiers trained for years on maneuvering through dense woods found their expertise turned against them. The large trees they once trusted for cover now worked like a deadly amplifier, turning a single shell burst into a 36-0-degree kill zone of metal and wood. No amount of tactical wisdom, no manual of soldiering, could fully prepare troops for this new reality. To spread out was to be vulnerable to the enormous kill radius. To cluster together was to risk entire squads being wiped out in one precise explosion. American artillery observers recognized this multiplier effect quickly and adjusted their fire with devastating results. Meanwhile, German technical intelligence was floundering. Despite their own early research into proximity fuse technology before the war, the German military leadership failed spectacularly in understanding and countering the American innovation. When German forces captured thousands of these fuses, engineers dismissed the technology as impossible to replicate, misreading the intricate vacuum tube radar as a decoy or magnetic device. Years earlier, German companies Rheinmetall-Borsig and AEG had prototypes that might have led to operational proximity fuses by 1941. But Hitler's arbitrary cancellation of long-term weapons projects had crippled this effort. While the Allies raced ahead, Germany fell behind, not for lack of skill or resources, but for strategic blindness and misplaced priorities. The psychological impact on German troops was intense. Soldiers who had prided themselves on toughness and skill found themselves helpless against this invisible weapon. Accounts from the front described panic and breakdowns in discipline among even elite SS units. Some viewed death straight in the face and chose to charge American lines rather than endure the merciless bombardment from above. December 25th, Christmas Day, brought no respite. German resupply efforts, assembly areas, even field kitchens came under relentless artillery fire. Unlike previous artillery barrages that required forward observation and only struck in clear conditions, proximity fuses enabled artillery to fire effectively in darkness, fog, and bad weather. The old sanctuary of poor visibility was lost. American artillery units fired these shells relentlessly that day. The 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion alone used over 1,000 proximity-fused rounds, launching devastating barrages from their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers that ripped through German formations attempting to regroup. The relentless 24-hour threat turned the battlefield into a place of constant terror. In this landscape, the proximity fuse was more than a weapon. It was a force that reshaped the conduct and psychology of the Battle of the Bulge. From forests to frozen rivers, towns to open fields, it transformed the artillery from massive support fire to a decisive instrument of battlefield dominance, securing America's foothold in one of history's deadliest winter battles. Behind every technological marvel lies the story of tireless industrial effort, and the proximity fuse was no exception. The development and mass production of this weapon was a colossal achievement, rivaling in scale even the famous Manhattan Project. By December 1944, America's industrial base had fully mobilized to produce proximity fuses at an astonishing rate, one every 2 seconds around the clock. More than 100 companies across the nation shifted their production lines to this vital task. The Crosley Corporation abandoned refrigerator manufacturing to assemble fuses. Emerson Radio converted its home electronics factories into weapons plants. Giants like RCA, Sylvania, and General Electric dedicated entire facilities to the complicated process. The workforce, predominantly women working 12-hour shifts 6 days a week, labored in secrecy under tight compartmentalization. These workers were unaware of the exact nature of their product, but understood its vital importance. Every fuse contained roughly 130 individual components, and each component was subject to rigorous quality control. The factories enforced standards unmatched in mass production history. Every solder joint was inspected under magnification. Random samples were test-fired to ensure survivability under extreme combat conditions, and even slight deviations resulted in rejection. It was a relentless pursuit of perfection. At the war's outset, each fuse was an expensive luxury, costing over $700, more than the annual salary of many workers. But through innovations in manufacturing and economies of scale, the cost dropped dramatically to just $18 per unit by late 1944. This price reduction, combined with the sheer volume of production, enabled millions of fuses to be shipped during the war, with approximately 200,000 used during the Battle of the Bulge alone. The precision, scale, and speed of this production effort symbolized the broader American war machine at its peak. A fusion of scientific ingenuity, industrial capacity, and national will. The proximity fuse embodied how the United States could translate cutting-edge research into battlefield dominance almost overnight. But the story of production was more than numbers. It was about people. The mostly female workforce, their hands assembling components they could neither discuss nor understand fully, worked tirelessly, unaware that their careful labors were deciding the fate of battles thousands of miles away. In this web of human effort and industrial might, the proximity fuse emerged as a hallmark of Allied technological supremacy, reshaping the very nature of artillery warfare and helping to turn the tide in the Ardennes, one meticulously crafted shell at a time. Far from the production lines, the psychological toll of the proximity fuse on German soldiers was profound and often brutal. These men, many hardened by years of warfare on the Eastern Front, confronted an enemy more insidious than any tank or rifle, the invisible, unrelenting menace of airburst shells that tore through the forest canopy with lethal precision. Elite German units, among them Colonel Otto Skorzeny's commandos, highly trained soldiers who had executed daring missions like Mussolini's rescue, found themselves shattered, not by conventional firepower, but by the proximity-fused artillery. Their expertise, their camouflage, their tactics, all became liabilities when death rained down from above with unmatched accuracy. Skorzeny's attempt to capture the Belgian town of Malmedy on December 21st ended in catastrophic failure. His soldiers, wearing American uniforms as infiltrators, were caught under a barrage of airburst shells that seemed to know their positions. The proximity fuse's deadly timing turned their tactical advantage into a death sentence. Casualties were heavy, morale shattered, and the offensive ground to a halt. Reports from survivors revealed a striking psychological phenomenon. Some of the most fanatical troops, indoctrinated with beliefs in their own invincibility, succumbed to a breakdown in discipline. Faced with unceasing airbursts, some charged toward American lines, preferring quick death to relentless bombardment. This collapse of morale among elite soldiers revealed the fuse's power beyond mere physical destruction. It was a weapon of psychological ruin. The fear induced by these shells extended beyond the battlefield into the hearts and minds of German soldiers across the Ardennes. Traditional combat routines, moving under cover, regrouping at night, seeking sanctuary in weather that grounded Allied aircraft, were rendered futile. The fuse transformed artillery into a 24-hour, all-weather threat. Its whispering menace followed soldiers everywhere. German commanders scrambled to understand and counter this new menace, but their efforts were too little, too late. Intelligence never grasped the full scope of the technology. Hampered by internal skepticism and strategic missteps, the psychological scars inflicted by the proximity fuse echoed long after the battle, marking a turning point in soldiers' experience of modern warfare, an era where science dictated survival far more than courage or skill. As the Battle of the Bulge pressed into its grueling final stages, American commanders harnessed the unique power of the proximity fuse to its fullest extent. General George S. Patton's Third Army, driving relentlessly north to relieve besieged troops in Bastogne and surrounding areas, became the most visible example of tactical innovation enabled by this weapon. Patton fully grasped the strategic value of the fuse, famously describing it as the funny fuse that had turned the course of the battle. Under his direction, new artillery tactics were developed that capitalized on the autonomous targeting ability of proximity-fused shells. Brigadier General Edward Williams, Patton's artillery commander, pioneered what would become known as time-on-target fire. This tactic involved coordinating multiple artillery battalions to fire simultaneously, so that dozens of shells burst in the air at once, creating a nearly continuous wall of lethal fragments. Instead of scattered and staggered barrages, the enemy faced a perfect storm of airbursts that decimated formations before soldiers could react or seek cover. During the crucial week from December 22nd to 29th, Patton's forces fired an estimated 50,000 proximity-fused shells. The shells shattered German offensive capabilities, breaking enemy lines and opening corridors vital for the relief of Bastogne. This concentrated firepower played a pivotal role in blunting Hitler's last major offensive. The battle on Elsenborn Ridge, a critical defensive position held by the 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions, showcased the full potential of the fuse. Over 3 days, American artillery poured roughly 160,000 rounds into the advancing 6th SS Panzer Army, of which around 40,000 carried proximity fuses. Though only 25% of the shells, these accounted for an estimated 60% of the 5,000-plus German casualties. The lethal mathematics were undeniable. Proximity fuses multiplied artillery effectiveness by a factor of 4. German attacks against the steep, heavily forested slopes met with devastating walls of airburst steel that shattered assault formations before they could mount coordinated efforts. The fuse transcended its technical brilliance to become a symbol of Allied tactical dominance. It redefined not just how artillery was used, but how entire battles were fought. From the frozen woods to snow-covered ridges, the relentless hail of airburst shells heralded a new era, a deadly chapter written in science and steel that shaped the war's final months. While the proximity fuse helped change the course of the Battle of the Bulge on the front lines, its engineers and scientists faced relentless challenges behind the scenes, ensuring the delicate electronics could survive the harshest conditions of the battlefield. Each fuse contained miniature vacuum tubes, fragile components normally found only in radios and electronics operating in controlled environments. To adapt these to endure the brutal stresses of artillery fire, to survive acceleration forces reaching 20,000 times gravity, required innovation at the cutting edge of physics and engineering. At the moment a shell was fired, a glass ampule inside the fuse shattered, releasing electrolyte to activate a tiny battery that powered the miniature radar. This self-contained system, no bigger than a coffee can, needed to function flawlessly throughout the shell's flight, which could last several seconds under freezing temperatures and intense centrifugal force. Factory workers maintained meticulous quality control to ensure reliability exceeded 80%, a staggering achievement for 1940s technology under such hostile conditions. Their hardened vacuum tubes, engineered by scientists like Dr. James Van Allen, were smaller than pencil erasers, but packed with the functionality of much larger radio tubes. Testing at Aberdeen Proving Grounds refined optimal burst heights, 30 feet for the standard 105mm artillery, and 50 feet for the heavier 155mm guns. Larger 240mm shells reached 70 feet or more, clearing entire grid squares. Those precision heights maximized lethality, turning an artillery barrage into a deadly aerial storm. Amidst the war's chaos, the program's secrecy was paramount. Each fuse bore a unique serial number. Workers never saw beyond their small segment of a fuse's assembly. The knowledge that their efforts shaped the war's outcome remained abstract, yet their part was critical. In addition to mass production, research continued to improve reliability, durability, and efficiency. The proximity fuse program drove miniaturization techniques that would later spark revolutions in electronics beyond the battlefield. This fusion of scientific brilliance, industrial might, and soldiers' resolve embodied the essence of American power during the war's darkest months. A weapon born not only from engineering, but from the relentless will to prevail. As artillery shells exploded with precise timing over frozen forests, every successful detonation was a testament to thousands of unseen hands and brilliant minds working in unison, shaping the future of warfare and victory in the Ardennes. Despite the proximity fuse's game-changing impact on the battlefield, the German forces were unable to mount effective countermeasures. Their intelligence failure regarding this new technology was catastrophic, a consequence of both institutional skepticism and the shadow of earlier misguided decisions. When German troops overran an American ammunition depot and captured roughly 20,000 proximity-fused shells, their experts faced a mystery. The presence of vacuum tubes inside artillery shells defied all expectations. Many engineers dismissed them as decoys or misunderstood the mechanism, speculating magnetic or rudimentary electric devices housed within. The irony was striking. Before the war, German companies Rheinmetall Borsig and AEG Berlin had developed early prototypes of proximity fuses and were close to production by 1941. But Hitler's orders to scrap any projects that required over 6 months for mass production had abruptly ended this work, stalling what could have been a critical advantage. By the war's close, Germany's electrostatic proximity fuses, based on electrical capacitance changes rather than radar, showed high reliability in tests. Yet the program never reached deployment. In post-war interrogations, senior figures like Hermann Göring admitted they were only months away from operational use when the conflict ended. The Germans' inability to comprehend and deploy this technology cost them dearly in the Ardennes, as they faced an unstoppable form of artillery fire that reshaped tactics and morale. The failure to understand the fuse's function was a stark example of how technological innovation, combined with strategic vision, tipped the scales in the Allies' favor. The proximity fuse not only devastated German forces physically, but shattered their confidence in the tools and tactics they had relied on. It was a weapon that symbolized the fusion of science and war, and the unforgiving cost of failing to innovate in time. As the war drew to its final months, the story of the proximity fuse became a symbol of American scientific and industrial triumph. The secret weapon's impact extended beyond the battlefield, revolutionizing electronics, miniaturization, and radar technology for decades to come. In the midst of victory, American engineers and scientists reflected on their monumental achievement. What had started as a classified wartime project had accelerated developments that would underpin civilian electronics, medical imaging, and space exploration long after the guns fell silent. The tiny vacuum tubes, miniature radar systems, and precision engineering laid the groundwork for the electronic age. The soldiers, generals, and scientists involved understood that the proximity fuse's true power was not solely in its destructive capacity, but in its demonstration of what human ingenuity and industrial effort could accomplish under pressure. It proved that even in the chaos of war, science could turn the tide, a lesson that echoed in every modern battlefield and innovation lab since. On the battlefield, the direct effect of proximity-fused shells was undeniable. They nullified defenses built around concealment and terrain, forcing armies to rethink tactics and strategy. The dense forests and icy river crossings, once refuge to the enemy, became death traps where the unseen eye of technology rained destruction from above. The Battle of the Bulge marked the definitive turning point, a conflict not only of steel and fire, but of mind and machine. The American proximity fuse had demonstrated the future, where science, technology, and war intertwined in a deadly dance that would define the 20th century and beyond.